Welcome to our webinar. My name is Professor Anne Karagosian, and it is my pleasure as the director of the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA to co-host this event with the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA Law School, and in partnership with the UCLA Armenian Music Program under the direction of Professor Movses Pogossian. Today's presentation and discussion, led by Dr. Melissa Bilal of UCLA and Dr. Lerna Ekmekcioglu of MIT, is entitled Paging Through Photos and Songs, Hayganush Mark and Koharig Ghazarosian's Friendship in Post-Genocide Istanbul. This talk is particularly relevant today at the cusp of the 106th anniversary of the start of the Armenian Genocide on April 24th, 1915. There is much that we who are descendants of genocide survivors can learn from the story of these two remarkable women whose friendship and talents and lives were inextricably intertwined during one of the most horrific periods in the early 20th century. So we welcome you to this event, and we encourage you to ask questions after the presentation and to be fully engaged in this event. For today's event, we are grateful to note the co-sponsorship of the UCLA Center for the Study of Women, the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, the UCLA Armenian Law Students Association, the UCLA Department of Gender Studies, the Armenian Museum of America, the Society for Armenian Studies, and the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. Thanks to all of you. And on behalf of the co-sponsors here at UCLA, I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the faculty director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights, Professor Asla Bali of the UCLA School of Law. Professor Bali has been a faculty member at UCLA since 2009, and her principal scholarly interests lie in public international law, including human rights law and the law of the International Security Order, and comparative constitutional law with a focus on the Middle East. So Asla, I'll turn this over to you now.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I am also delighted to welcome everyone to this event on behalf of the Promise Institute for Human Rights, all of our co-sponsors. Of course, thank you so much, Anne, as always, for the support of the Promise Institute on Armenian Studies. The sheer extent of our co-sponsors for today's talk and performance should serve as an indicator of how much excitement this event has occasioned at the whole of the university across our campus, and indeed far beyond, and rightly so. Each year at the Promise Institute for Human Rights, we think carefully about the events we would like to organize in the month of April as part of our commemoration of the Armenian Genocide, exactly as Anne captured in her beautiful remarks just a moment ago. While most of our events at the Promise Institute for Human Rights, of course, have a human rights thematic focus, over the last few years, we've also been interested in expanding our focus to thinking about the role of the arts, of storytelling, and of music in the work of memory, of honoring, of paying tribute, and of giving voice to demands for accountability in the context of recognition of the genocide. We could hardly have hoped for a better framing to encompass all of these goals and more than the beautiful story of loss, of endurance, of survival, and of friendship that is at the heart of today's event. My role, of course, is to introduce our extraordinary speakers and performers who will be presenting this story and the scholarship that has recovered and reframed it. In making these introductions, I cannot help but convey what is so remarkable about the event as these two incredible academics, both women who began their own studies at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, share with us their work on two other exceptionally accomplished women who became friends and collaborators a century earlier in post-genocide Istanbul. I will begin by introducing our speakers in the order that they will speak, and then also introduce the artists whose performance will comprise a portion of our event before turning the floor for the beginning of the event itself with Professor Bilal. Melissa Bilal is a historian and social anthropologist specialized in music and gender studies. She is currently a Distinguished Research Fellow at the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies and lecturer in the Department of Ethnomusicology at UCLA. She received her BA and MA in sociology at Boğaziçi University, Istanbul, and earned her PhD in music from the University of Chicago. She was a Mellon postdoctoral teaching fellow in music at Columbia University. Her recent publications include the article Lullabies and the Memory of Pain, Armenian Women's Remembrance of the Past in Turkey, the CD project, Voiced Imprints, Recordings of Russian Armenian POWs in German Camps, 1916 to 1918, and the co-authored book, My Heart is Like Those Ruined Houses, Gomidas Vartabed's Musical Legacy in Turkish. In 2017, while a visiting scholar of history at MIT, Bilal co-launched the annual Feminist Armenian Studies Workshop and co-founded the Feminist Armenian Research Collective with Dr. Lerna Ekmekcioglu. Ekmekcioglu and Bilal are also the co-editors of the book A Cry for Justice, 5 Armenian feminist writers from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic of Turkey, 1862 to 1933 in Turkish, and are now collaborating on another book, Feminism in Armenian, an interpretive anthology and digital archive, which will be forthcoming from Stanford University Press, as well as a digital humanities project focusing on 12 Armenian feminist writers who were active in the Ottoman and post-Ottoman contexts and their diasporas. Dr. Bilal is also currently working on her own monograph, tentatively titled Wake Up Lullaby, Gendered Politics of Indigeneity, Music, and Memory in the Late Ottoman Armenian Revolutionary Imagination, and the ethnographic research project, The Injuries of Reconciliation, Being Armenian in Turkey. Professor Lerna Ekmekcioglu is Macmillan Stewart Associate Professor of History at MIT, where she is also affiliated with the Women and Gender Studies program. Professor Ekmekcioglu received her BA from Boğaziçi University and her PhD from New York University. Her first monograph, Recovering Armenia, The Limits of Belonging in Post-Genocide Turkey, was published by Stanford University Press in 2016. She previously published an edited volume together with Professor Bilal, which I mentioned a moment ago, the English language title for which is A Cry for Justice, 5 Armenian Feminist Writers from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic, 1862 to 1933. Currently, she is working on an article on the Turkish feminist nationalist Halide Edvard, as well as collaborating with Melissa Bilal for the book and digital humanities project, again, that I mentioned a moment ago, Feminism in Armenian, an interpretive anthology and digital archive, which focuses on the life and works of 12 pioneering women intellectuals from the 1860s to the 1960s. In addition, we will be joined today in an exceptional performance by a set of artists that we are so fortunate to have engaged in this performance and to have the privilege of seeing during the event today. I'm going to introduce the artists as well before turning the floor to Professor Bilal. The first is mezzo-soprano Danielle Segen, who is praised for possessing extraordinary expressivity and a beautiful voice. She has enjoyed international success with the UCLA Vem Ensemble, performing Armenian repertoire in schools and concert halls around the world. She earned her Master's of Music degree at UCLA, where she studied with Juliana Gondek, equally at home singing new compositions as she is performing from the standard repertoire of opera and art song. Danielle has been sought after to workshop, record, and perform new works, most recently having premiered Arteches Kartalyan's Tekayan Triptych alongside the VEM String Quartet. We are also joined by Steven Vanhauwaert, a pianist who is hailed by the Los Angeles Times for his impressive clarity, sense of structure, and monster technique. He has garnered a wide array of accolades, amongst which include the first prize at the Los Angeles International List competition. He has also made his solo debut at Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, and since then has appeared as a soloist at the National Center of the Performing Arts in Beijing, the Great Hall of the Budapest Liszt Conservatory, and the National Philharmonic Hall in Kiev. Recent albums include Joseph Wolf, The Paris Years by Sonarty Records, and Pensée Intime from Hortus Records, which were included in the top 10 awards on the Belgian radio and received a 5 diapason rating in France. His recent solo release from Hortus with works of Ferruccio Busoni has garnered rave reviews. And finally, Nora Armani, an actress and performer who is an award-winning filmmaker with the international stage and screen credits of performances in multiple languages. Her recent stage credits include Terrorism at the Lenfest Center for the Arts in New York, Pirandello's 6 Characters in Search of an Author off-Broadway, and I, Migrant Woman online as a director. Recent television appearances include Blacklist, Redemption on NBC television. Her films have screened at the Cannes, Rotterdam, Paris, London, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Denver, Oregon, Kerala, Monaco, Shanghai, Yerevan, and New York film festivals. Nora Armani has organized and guest curated film festivals internationally and is the founding artistic director of Socially Relevant Film Festival New York since January 2013. Nora holds an MA in Theater and Film from Hunter College and MA in Sociology from the London School of Economics and has taught at the university level theater and media studies courses. This is such an impressive array of people that we will be hearing from and listening to today. And to start us off, I turn the floor now to Professor Melissa Bilal.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, dear Anne and dear Asla, for the kind introductions. I will now try to share my slides. Okay. Feminist writer Hayganush Mark and composer Koharig Ghazarosian posed to the camera on July 1957 to immortalize a moment of creativity, happiness, and friendship. They were gathered in Ghazarosian's apartment in Shishli, Istanbul, to hear a performance of her musical compositions. The repertoire presented on that day's program included the songs she wrote on Mark's poems. Words Koharig set to music were from Hayganush's poetry collection, Zulutyan Baheres, From My Moments of Laziness, published in Istanbul in 1921. One of the songs was Yerazes, My Dream, composed in Paris in 1934 to Mark's poem Odaratsum, Alienation in Armenian and in French translation. On the slide, we see a stamp that I enlarged from the score, which reads that in 1956, this musical composition was registered to Paris's Society for Authors, Composers, and Music Editors. Ghazarosian later wrote various vocal and instrumental arrangements for the melody of this song, which was dedicated to Margarit Babayan, then Paris-based famed mezzo-soprano, teacher, and music writer, also known as Gomidas Vartabet's companion and confidant. This precious piece that testifies to the intertwined lives of 3 giant women, a writer, a composer, and a prima donna, has remained as an unsung page of history and her story until musicologist and historian Hayk Avakyan graciously shared its scores with us from Cairo. Mezzo-soprano Danielle Segen and pianist Steven Vanhauwaert kindly agreed to take part in our project to breathe new life into Ghazarosian and Mark's collaborative creation. Lyrics roughly translate as, my dream, sometimes they take you away from me, into a foggy place in the middle of wilderness, or to a sunny place on top of a hill, or elsewhere. You wander in waterfronts, at the edges of capes, fading into the shadows of cane fields. But my dream, then you don't belong to me anymore. Let us take a moment to thank Danielle and Steven for their wonderful interpretation, and to Movses Pogossian, the director of Armenian music program at UCLA, for making this project come true. Stay tuned to hear more of this world premiere mini concert of Hayganush and Koharig songs. Our story with Hayganush Mark and Koharig Ghazarosian goes back to 1990s. When we both were, Lerna and I, were both college students in Istanbul. With our friend Belinda Mumcu of the same sociology department at Boğaziçi University, we researched Hayganush Mark's life and feminist thought manifested in her editorials for the women's journal Haygin, Armenian Women, she published in Istanbul immediately after World War I and the genocide. The essay we wrote for the history writing contest among college students organized by the Social and Economic History Foundation in Turkey won the third prize and was printed in the March 2001 issue of Toplumsal Tarih Social History Journal. This was the first scholarly article ever written in Turkish on an Ottoman and post-Ottoman era Armenian feminist writer and activist, comparing her with her contemporary Turkish Muslim counterparts who were active in the same city. This was also our first intervention in the historiographic narrative of Ottoman women's movement, which excluded the voices and struggles of non-Muslim, non-Turkish women of the empire and the republic. On the cover of this issue, you see the title page of Haygin, and on the right, you see the same photograph we opened today's lecture with, printed with our essay. Back then, when we had access to only a limited number of Haygin issues and very little access to the originals of Hayganush Mark's photographs, it was Hagop Ayvaz, the editor-in-chief of Kulis Performing Arts Journal, who gave us an original hard copy of this gem so that we could Xerox it. You will recall Kulis from my earlier slide covering the concert during which this photo was taken. And in this photograph, you see me, Lerna, Delal Ding, and Neda Bebiroğlu, a group of Armenian feminists researching Armenian women's history, working with Hagop Ayvaz and Hrant Dink at the Agos Armenian Turkish weekly newspaper's first office in Istanbul. This was in 1999, 8 years before Hrant Dink fell victim to a state-orchestrated hate crime during daytime on a sidewalk of that street on January 19, 2007. Hagop Ayvaz, who was a regular columnist in Agos, passed away in 2006. Today, his archive, Ayvaz's archive, is housed in the International Hrant Dink Foundation in Istanbul, to which we are thankful for providing precious material for this lecture today. With this photo, we also commemorate Hrant Dink and Hagop Ayvaz and their precious place in our lives and consciousness about the generation of Armenian intellectuals who survived the genocide and continued living in Istanbul. A few years after this photo was taken, in our first years as graduate students in the US, Lerna and I published the volume Bir Adalet Feryadı, A Cry for Justice, featuring 5 Armenian feminist writers, which came out in 2006 from Aras Yayıncılık. Aras Yayıncılık was another Armenian institution of which foundation in the mid-1990s should be considered a turning point in our community's history. Along with Agos, Aras was an intellectual home for us in our college years in Istanbul. The next step after this book was pursuing graduate level research on Hayganush Mark, which Lerna did in her dissertation. Her monograph came out in English in 2016 and in Turkish in 2021. Drawing on an examination of Haygin's content for 14 years, along with other primary sources shedding light onto the armistice years, Lerna wrote the history of our native community in its formative or transformative years from the empire to the republic as a minoritized population in a new nation state, the Turkish Republic. While Lerna was working on Hayganush Mark and Post-Genocide Armenian Feminism in Istanbul, I was conducting my dissertation research on the history and memory of Armenian lullabies, which brought Koharig Ghazarosian's lullaby composition into my attention again, through Hayganush's volumes of Ghazarosian's mostly previously unpublished works. Originally conceived as the third movement of a piano suite, here you see the first page of this piece titled Ororotay'in Berceuse Lullaby as the third movement of a string quartet. My doctoral research also focused on the song collections, musical compositions, and musicological writings by Gomidas Vartabet, about whom I mentioned earlier. My postdoctoral work led to a co-authored volume with my colleague Burcu Yıldız. My Heart is Like Those Ruined Houses, Gomidas Vartabet's Musical Legacy, is a volume in Turkish that shed lights onto the years this Kütahya-born Echmiadzin and Berlin-educated turn of the 20th century Armenian intellectual and clergyman's activities in the Ottoman capital from 1910 up until his arrest and deportation during the genocide, his traumatic survival, and eventual move to a mental clinic outside Paris. The book's main aim is to introduce Gomidas Vartabet as one of the founders of Berlin School of Modern Musicology, and to showcase his scholarship not only on Armenian language songs, but also those in Kurdish and Turkish. And I argue that Gomidas and the genealogy of Ottoman Armenian music ethnographers and composers he belonged to were deliberately discredited and silenced, but their projects were appropriated by state-sponsored institutions of early Republican Turkey in their efforts to create a Turkish musical culture with a denialist and destructionist approach to anything they deemed to be non-national. The more I delved into this history, the more I understood the significance of Margarit Babayan's intimate friendship for Gomidas and the way Koharig Ghazarosian's life and works relate to Gomidas. Pianist, composer, and pedagogue Koharig Ghazarosian was born in Constantinople, Istanbul, on December 21st, 1907, and died in Paris on October 29, 1967. I will try to give you a brief account of her life story, which I put together from various printed sources, but mainly from her niece, Sona Bedrosian, in Paris, who graciously agreed to answer my questions via email and shared precious details and archival sources pertaining to her aunt's life. Ghazarosian used different Latinized versions of her name, but the one you see on the very top line was standardized after a certain point, and it is the version that has been commonly used in many international publications. Today in my slides, I will use the transliteration that is the closest to the pronunciation of her name in Armenian. Her first name was Alice, and since the Ghazarosian family was given the Haser last name with the 1934 Turkish surname law, her full name was Alice Koharig Ghazarosian Haser. Koharig's mother, Eugenie Nazarian Ghazarosian, was from Eyüp, Istanbul, and father, Grigor Ghazarosian, was from Garin, Erzurum. Koharig's elementary education coincided with World War I. It was the most difficult times for Armenians. The community she grew up in witnessed the arrest and murder of its intellectuals and leaders. It received the news of mass deportations and killings of Armenians all over the empire. During these troubling times, the family stayed in mainland Istanbul and one of its islands, as many other Armenians did. The city of Koharig's early youth looked like a refugee camp for Armenian genocide survivors from the provinces. Most of them would soon leave the country along with the remaining intellectuals when the victorious Turkish army entered the city soon after Koharig's graduation from Esayan Armenian Community School. And on this photograph, you see Koharig sitting at far right, front row. the graduating class of Esayan School. Koharig's performing career began at a very early age. She took music lessons from prominent local Armenian and European composers in Istanbul while still at school. In July 1926, she left for Paris with her father and sister, and in 1927, she began attending the French National Conservatory of Music, where she studied piano, harmony, and composition. In 1934, she gave her solo debut recital as a concert pianist in Paris, where she performed a repertoire including one of her own compositions. It is around this time that she worked with Paris Armenian community's Sipan Gomidas choir as a pianist and accompanied the choir singing her own choral works. She gave concerts at several venues, continued composing and teaching piano. Her name appeared in journals such as L'Art Musical. In the second half of the 30s, she also visited Istanbul, and this clipping that you see on the slide is from Arevelk, the Orient, an Armenian newspaper in Istanbul, reports in 1936 that Ghazarosian is coming from Paris for 2 months to spend the summer vacation and is expected to have a concert during her stay. In 1939, Ghazarosian moved back to Istanbul with her mother due to doctors' recommendations for her mother's health. Throughout the 40s, she had concerts in then famous Istanbul stages such as Union Française or in her own studio. Between 1947 and 1949, for about a year and a half, with the invitation of Colombia, Ghazarosian toured the US and performed in major concert venues of the East Coast, including the Carnegie Hall. Her recital at Brooklyn Museum was aired on radio. While in New York, she also met and worked with famous pianist Edward Weiss. Her recitals were reported in New York Times, New York Herald Tribune, and other major US newspapers, and by way of these reports also in Cumhuriyet Daily in Turkey. Inspired by Johann Sebastian Bach's The Well-Tempered Clavier, she studied the individual characteristics of the major and minor tones and the way composers from the 18th to 20th centuries interpreted them. She put together 24 different concert programs named Programme Bien Temperé, each dedicated to works composed in a key to show the variety of tonalities each key contained, and how composers experimenting with the possibilities during this variety opened. The first of these recitals, obviously, was the C major concert, was presented during her US tour in Calvary Baptist Church in 1949. Ghazarosian was praised by music critics for this innovative idea, and her masterful interpretations of the piano works, her technique, dynamism, and maturity as a concert pianist. Upon her return from the US in 1949, she began touring several European capitals, along with Lebanon, Cairo, and Istanbul, with this very program, performing on stages such as Salle Gaveau of Paris, Wigmore Hall of London, and appearing on radio and TV stations across Europe, playing with major orchestras under the batons of famous conductors. During all this time, Margarit Babayan regularly attended Ghazarosian's recitals and concerts in Paris and wrote to Istanbul's Kulis about her performances and the recognition she enjoyed by music critics, both as a composer and a pianist. She repeatedly noted the importance of informing Armenians about the achievements of this internationally acclaimed member of their own community. I don't have all of her performance programs, but in what I have done, I don't see any women composers in her music history in one tone concert programs she presented. And I wonder if she ever performed any woman composer other than herself, or any composer who has not been canonized in Western classical music repertoire. In that sense, she is a revolutionary because she inserted Gomidas Vartabet into this genealogy by performing his works as a part of these programs. But what is even more revolutionary was her ending the programs with her own works. An entry about her in Norbert Dufourc's 1958 edition of Musique Larousse was perhaps a first solid step towards writing her into the canon. The fact that she was included in this international encyclopedia made it to the news in Istanbul Armenian press as well. In the 1950s, Koharig performed in Istanbul in places such as Küçük Sahne or Galatasaray High School Conference Hall, or at one of the Armenian school alumni clubs, as well as her own studio. She spent most of 1960s in Istanbul. She worked as the chair of SIN Alumni Club's music committee. She invited many Armenian musicians from different parts of the world, organized concerts for and with them, and regularly wrote about them in coulisses. On this slide, you see her with various local Armenian musicians as well as opera singers Armen Girak visiting from Argentina and Koharig Ghazarosian from Armenia, and violinist Girard Kantarjian visiting from Beirut. Koharig was the liaison between her native community and the Armenians dispersed around the world. She had the dream of forming an organization for Armenian musicians in the diaspora. When in 1965, Azeri composer and conductor Niyazi Tagizadeh Hajibeyov was invited to conduct the Istanbul Opera Orchestra, Ghazarosian hosted him and a circle of musicians, artists, writers, and journalists in her apartment. She penned the piece for coulisses on Tagizadeh Hajibeyov, who was well-versed in the repertoire created by Armenian composers because he conducted many of their works, also because he studied composition with the same mentor as Armenian composer Aram Khachadurian. Another musician Koharig wrote about was, of course, Gomidas Vartabet. Her visit to Gomidas's birthplace in Kütahya was one of the most impactful experiences of her life. There she saw his birth home, visited his cousin, who was still there, and other members of the family, who told her that during the genocide, they had to burn everything they had related to Gomidas, except for one issue of one journal that had his photo in it. The piece Uqtaknatsutyu Tebi Kütahya, a pilgrimage to Kütahya, she wrote for Zamanak Daily in Istanbul, was reprinted in diaspora periodicals. In 1943, researcher, writer, and bookstore owner Toros Azadyan, who had some of Gomidas's belongings from his time in Istanbul, had trusted Koharig Ghazarosian Gomidas's handwritten notebooks with transcriptions of 70 songs he collected in 1913 from villages in the then Yerevan province of Russian Empire, which includes what is today Iğdır in Turkey. Between 1942 and 1947, Ghazarosian carefully studied these manuscripts in Armenian notation, which is also known as Hampartum News. She self-taught herself the theory of Armenian modes, examined the structure of the melodies Gomidas wrote down, and Gomidas's overall compositional strategies in his previously published folk song arrangements as a guide for her own arrangements of these songs, and her arrangements on 20 of these songs for voice and piano were published in Lebanon in 1950. She writes that then, after studying these songs, she felt like finally she was speaking Armenian in music. And when I worked on Gomidas documents under Toros Azadyan's archive in Yerevan, I was able to match the songs in Koharig's publication that you see on the slide, the arrangements, with one of Gomidas's handwritten song collection notebooks from the summer of 1913. The 1950 publication of Ghazarosian's works was not the first. In 1940, a collection of her works had been printed in Paris. In 1967, her 24 etudes with Armenian themes came out. Her other published works appeared in Lebanon in 1948 and 1957 in the Husk Yearbook of Armenian Studies. They were the polyphonic settings of church melodies, something she inherited from Armenian composers before her, especially Gomidas Vartabet. It is obvious that she considered herself continuing Gomidas's work. And yes, she did continue from where he left off. Who had to leave off. And as Hayganush argues, she furthered it. Unfortunately, I don't recall any of her harmonized chants ever performed in the church. Ghazarosian wanted to visit Armenia, but she waited until she could go there full-handed, meaning with more compositions. Her dream never came true, but her work was printed in a famous anthology in Armenia during her lifetime. On the other hand, most of her works remained unpublished until Avakian visited Sona Bedrosyan in Paris in 2001 and got copies of the composer's manuscripts. Avakian edited, annotated, and published them in separate volumes and enriched them with musicological introductions. Ghazarosian's output is in a variety of musical forms and genres. Obviously, most of her works are written for piano, but she has many works also for different combinations of violin, viola, cello, flute, oboe, and organ. She has numerous solo and choral works and a ballet suite. In 1962, she participated in a composition contest in Poznan, Poland. I won't talk about Ghazarosian's musical language, but I want to note that critics compared her melodies to those of Gabrielle Fauré and her repertoire to that of Bela Bartok. She herself liked writing about her stylistic choices. For example, in a letter from Istanbul to her student Ardashes Shilomyan, then in Massachusetts, she noted that although the 12-tone technique was in fashion then, she still preferred to compose tonal music. Shilomyan and Ghazarosian correspondence over decades provide us with precious details about her life. He prepared a manuscript, but unfortunately couldn't manage to publish it. Shilomyan Archive is housed in Armenian Cultural Foundation, Boston today, and we thank Ara Ghazarians for making it accessible to us. In this letter, Ghazarosian notes that she just finished composing her 24 etudes and performed them in Paris. Positive reviews she received led to an invitation of publication, and now the 24 etudes are in press, and we saw that they were published. She also adds in the letter that she completed 7 of her intended 24 preludes and that she is invited to perform her Concerto No. 1 with an orchestra in Egypt. In 1967, Ghazarosian was in Egypt. Her appearance on Cairo and Alexandria stages were covered in local Armenian and French newspapers with great admiration. The same year, she played her 24 etudes to renowned composer Aram Khachadurian. She had previously met and wrote about Khachadurian in coulisses. She would later hang a photo of him on her wall in Istanbul and use it as a source of inspiration and motivation to compose when she felt weak. Koharig Ghazarosian passed away in Paris, where she had gone for treatment a few months after her last tour to Egypt. Her funeral was held at Paris's Surp Hovannes Mgrdich Church on November 2nd. Many of her friends and musicians she performed with wrote eulogies for this woman who challenged many artificial divides and boundaries with her intellect, wisdom, talent, vision, love, and patience. And they repeated penning their memoirs and memories and holding memorials for her in the following years. Her close friend Adrine Dadrian, with whom she started her artistic career in 1937 and wanted to write an opera on one of her works, Dadrian's works, wrote on her anniversary, "Koharig, you passed from this world like a dream." You see in this photo on the right, Adrine Dadrian, who is the older sister of prominent genocide scholar Vahakn Dadrian, and who raised him since they lost their parents very young. You also see Koharig Ghazarosian and Hayganush Mark. We opened this program with the poem My Dream, and now We will hear Ammen Pan Hovin, Everything to the Wind, from Danielle and Steven, and then Lerna will talk about Hayganush Mark. Ammen Pan Hovin lyrics roughly translate as, I pluck out the leaves of a spring snowflake. Its white petals dance in the air. I pull my hair and its black strands melt in the air. I pull out memories and its pieces fade out in the air. Around me, there are many things that stare at me, but I do not look at them anymore. I don't care. And with a strange fury, I grab them, spread them to the wind, to the wind.
Now I will take us to through a quick tour of Hayganush Mark's life, and I'm going to try to connect it to the story that we already heard. Let me first share my screen. Can you see it now? Good. Let me see now first. Hold just a second. There's a good. It should work now. Okay. So we are going a little bit back in time now. She was born, Hayganush Mark, about 22 years before Koharig Ghazarosian in 1885. And she would die only 1 year before Koharig Ghazarosian. So Koharig actually died early. And unlike Ghazarosian, Hayganush Mark never left Istanbul, except for a few quick trips to hot springs in Bursa. She was one of those people, one of the surviving Armenian intellectuals who remained put in Istanbul even after the establishment of the Turkish Republic. In this presentation, all the pictures that I use that are not published are from Yerushalayim's Museum of Art and Literature in Yerevan, about which I'll speak a little bit. Hayganush Mark was born in Ayazpaşa neighborhood of Istanbul to an illiterate mother and blind father of modest means. But like Ghazarosian, who came from a quite wealthy family, she managed to go to Esayan school because she had tuition waiver, given that they had this opportunity as well. And in that school, she was actually discovered by her Armenian teachers as someone who is talented in writing, in composition. One of the teachers that she had the fortune of having at the school was Zabel Asadur, Sibyl, the famed feminist writer, translator, linguist, and grammar textbook writer. And it was in Zabel Asadur's salon that Hayganush Mark was initiated to the intellectual circles of her time. After high school, she started working as a teacher at the Armenian Hospital's school/orphanage. And she also, Hayganush Mark, started publishing poetry in the periodicals. In 1904, she was asked to turn the journal Zarik, Flower, to a women's journal, which she gladly accepted. And it was during this time that she met and married Vahan Toshikyan, who was also a journalist. That's how they met, actually. And they became an intellectual couple who would have actually a lifelong collaborative relationship, very supportive of each other. When she was publishing Zarik, she was already, according to her, already a passionate feminist, Gragot feminist, keenly following the news of English suffragettes' strong demands, as well as French feminists. After the 1908 Young Turk Revolution, Hayganush Mark started volunteering for the newly reopened women's organizations, such as Askan Ver Hayhuyat, which is the Askan Ver Hayhuyat Ngerutyun, Armenian Patriotic Women's Association, as well as some others. This was a moment of excitement for Armenians that actually, as we all know, didn't last too long. During the genocide, they have experienced and witnessed the deportation and disappearance of many of their friends who were taken from Istanbul on April 24, beginning into April 24, 1915. Toshigyan, by coincidence, was already in prison at that time for something else that actually he wasn't around. So he was saved thanks to that, and most likely Hayganush Mark wasn't taken because she was a woman. But they spent the war years in Istanbul quite nervous, like many of the intellectuals of their milieu, waiting to be deported anytime, really. Thank God it didn't happen. And after, if anything, after the war, they had the fortune of experiencing this a moment of rebirth, what they would call the renaissance of some sort, what I call in my work recovery of Armenia and Armenianness. The signing of the Mudros Armistice, with which the Ottoman Empire accepted defeat, and the occupation of Istanbul by the Allies allowed Armenians to engage in various efforts for reconstruction and survival. Women were present and sometimes dominant in many of these relief organizations, hospitals, orphanages, shelter houses, schools that housed the survivors who now arrived to the city. Mark's Haygen, this journal, was born in this time of immense emotion and mobilization. It was published from 1919 to 1933. Always by her. She was the main person behind the whole publication, but it was initiated as the organ of the Armenian Women's Association, Hayganush, which included really most of the this powerhouse intellectual women of the time in Istanbul, and not just Armenian. They had other women, American women, for instance, also amongst their members. Their goal was first to participate in the recovery of Armenianness, to take care of the orphans, the sick, and to lobby for the Armenian cause, which was the establishment of Greater Armenia, which the leadership was supporting at the Paris Peace Conference, and to have full equality with men. This is the first organization amongst Armenians, a women's organization that in its program has full citizenship equality with men. Many of these women self-identified as feminists, And this is one of the reasons why in our upcoming anthology, we are covering, in addition to people that we have already published about previously, new women such as who are also the members of this organization, Anais Arshagui-Teotik, Zari Kalemkerian, and Zari Bahri. Haygin, meaning Armenian woman, promoted a new type of Armenian woman for the New Times. So it is depicted in the center of its masthead, which was drawn by the famed artist, painter, Sarkis Khachadurian. Young and Western looking, she loved art, she read and wrote. And obviously, I hope there is a piano in the background. She was also cognizant of her rights. In contrast, the old Armenian woman, which you see in those two corners, was voiceless, covered, and suppressed. But Haygin did not negate the old grandmother. On the contrary, by placing it on the two corners of its cover, like two angels, she acknowledged Haygin, or the publication acknowledged her importance as a symbol of tradition, and as well as continued importance of the grouphood and all things past. For a nation going through an existential crisis, the figure of the young, energetic, and forward-looking new woman had to be amalgamated with the old one. Haygin proudly featured such young Armenian women. But the way the journal talked about them changed in the 13-year career of Haygin. This is an important transition, really, because Haygin is one of the very few Armenian publications that continued uninterrupted publication from the immediate post-genocide years to the the interwar years, actually, really. It managed to exist for at least 10 more years after the establishment of the Turkish Republic. So, but it had to adjust to the changing conditions, and through Haygin's discourse, you can see it represents the ways in which the remaining community had to do, the ways in which the remaining community had to present itself to the new leadership of the country, which were not always very new, which was one of the reasons why they knew how to do it, how to adjust. In this picture, we see the students of Polish Jewish pianist and piano teacher Wanda Landowska, which was teaching at Paris' École Normale. And Haygin says that there's like 12 nations, that people belonging to 12 nations are taking lessons from her. And one of them is Armenia, Hayasta. And this is from November 1921. So it's already a Soviet Armenia, except the woman that's featured is not from Soviet Armenia. I mean, not featured, it's one of them, Arpine Inayetyan. But what is, for our purposes here, interesting is that Haygin mentioned that Miss Inayetyan, she went to Europe, she got an education in piano, and that she would one day return to Mair Hayrenik, mother fatherland. So at this moment, it's the imagined, hoped to be constructed Mother Armenia, and that she will, thanks to this excellent education and the possibility, I mean, capability of going back to the ancestral land, now having territorial sovereignty, she, quote, will be able to complete what Gomidas Vartabet had to leave unfinished. We don't know what happened to Inayetyan, and I have to mention that Koharig Ghazarosian at this point is only 13 years old, so she's not yet in the picture, but there's other expectations on the part of Haygin that women might and can continue his work. In the pages of Haygin, news pertaining to the art world appeared quite frequently. Painters, actors, dancers, musicians were promoted, and intensely so if they were women. But important to note, what is important to note here, that the kind of meanings that were attached to music and performance and arts in general changed. As an illuminating example, just a sample, I would like to bring to your attention one article. It was penned by Koharig Ghazarosian in September 1923. And September 1923 couldn't have been more telling, because it is right after the ratification of the Treaty of Lausanne, the birth certificate of modern Turkey, and it is like around the same time that the now defunct Ottoman Empire is being consolidated as the Turkish nation-state republic, in which Koharig Ghazarosian will live along with all others around her. She writes about a piano competition, of which there were many in Istanbul, amongst Armenians. And she notes that she will not go through an artistic critique of the performers or the pieces chosen, but she will interpret this from a perspective of spirituality almost. She says that Armenians have suffered a lot. Now they are dispersed all throughout the world. They have lost the political battles because Greater Armenia wasn't established and the perpetrators of the massacres were not punished. And that all international doors are closed on them. This is the doom moment. Everyone is talking about these things. But then she goes, one has difficulty believing that these people who play the piano so solemnly and those who listen to it so attentively belong to the same ruined nation. She concludes the piece by declaring that the Armenian nation will live as long as it pays attention to music and the arts, even though it has thousands of problems. Needless to say, therefore, children's music learning was especially encouraged. In the years following the Republic's establishment, a new emphasis in Haygan was on the many piano teachers. Melina Papelian was one among them. So Melina Papelian is likely related to Stepan Papelian, who was an important piano teacher, had a school of her own. But at one point, this Miss Papelian also starts her own piano school in line with the morphed discourse of Haygan, which now emphasized the peaceful coexistence of various different ethnic groups in Turkey. News of Papelian's students and their concerts were peppered with information that Greek, Turkish, and Jewish children also took lessons from her, and Haygan gave their names. Haygan also reported on the art scene in the Caucasus. News from Baku, Tiflis, and Yerevan. Not very often, but it was certainly there. Here we see a picture featuring the artists of the Yerevan State Theater. It was included in Haygan because of the Soul woman in the picture, but also because this woman was also from Istanbul. She was Arus Boskanyan, born in 1889, so somewhat contemporary of Mark. And she also went to Esayan school, comes from a poor background herself also. And then she was also a student of Zabel Asadur Sibel, who at one point leaves for the Caucasus and becomes a famed, quite well-known among Armenians, an actress performing various roles, including Ibsen's Nora in a doll's house in Tbilisi. Even though Haygan was quite docile and pro-regime publication after the 1923 establishment of the Republic, it was the Turkish government that closed down Haygan in 1933. This was pursuant of the new press law, which stated that people who worked for the enemies of the nation during the War of Independence, which was during the years of the occupation of many parts of Anatolia and Istanbul, were now forbidden from publishing periodicals or continuing their publications. So because of what Haygan was talking about, partially at least in the first 3-4 years, could be considered that the government closed down the journal quite abruptly. It was a super big shock for Hayganush Mark, who was depressed. She never had children. She considered Haygan as her daughter, which died, according to her, at the age of 13. So when her husband died in 1954, then up-and-coming photographer Ara Güler came to their house and pictured some of the belongings of Toshikyan, who continued as an important editor of an Armenian newspaper in Istanbul. She also took picture of Hayganush Mark in front of, and after so many years, it's still in front of the Haygin sign. So after Hayganush Mark, this continues a little bit, not as intensely, her activities, both in terms of writing and community participation. She gives lectures and all. In 1955, a group of women, younger women, who you see in the background here, it's Hayganush Mark is the one sitting, they organize a commemoration honoring day, 50th year of her jubilee, in Istanbul's Park Hotel. And Koharig Ghazarosian is one of these youngish, younger than her women, not young at that moment, who also kind of what she calls forces her to write her autobiography, a short autobiography she does write, and it is then included in this book that the committee published, thanks to which we learned about Hayganush Mark actually first time in 1999. And it was 3 years after, 2 years after this event, that this beautiful picture was taken right after Koharig Ghazarosian's mini concert or concert in her own home. I think one of the reasons we liked this picture from the very beginning, actually before seeing so many of Hayganush Mark pictures, we saw this picture in which she's smiling. And she's smiling with another woman, and they are really having a good time. It's such a defying type of laugh, really. It's not just a smile. I can hear them, we could hear them, which spoke to us, which gave us energy, and we felt empowered by this like carelessness of smile, because normally all these intellectuals are, and it's a candid, rather candid picture, and normally they are very poised and serious, and they want to be taken serious, so they will have to be a little bit more less light. This was a light picture, but it's also very telling in terms of the environment, obviously the decoration, I mean the furniture, the door, and the point about Hayganush Mark's feminism was that it never really negated the domestic sphere, this always being close to the traditional housewifery type of duties was something that she promoted along with her feminism. We also see this here with the plate and everything, and it's Koharig, of course, being younger and the host serving her, and the fact that they are connected, their arms are connected, that they are touching each other in this like sisterly kind of like manner also spoke to us when we first started working on these women. And apparently, we are sure that it also touched other people. I mean, what Hayganush Mark did for the next generations, before us, people were able to appreciate her. It's Adrina Dadrian. We have already heard from Melissa's presentation. She's here in the middle. She is a writer on her own, waiting to be really discovered and written about. She's the one who is the sister of Hakan Dadrian. Together with 2 other writers and actually musicians, they took care of her in her last days, actually, in the Armenian National Hospital in Istanbul, where this is in her deathbed. They are acting as daughters, really, for Hayganush Mark, who never had her own children, but clearly acted as mentors to the next generations. And she obviously was a cat lady. She always had cats, and this is why they wanted to her to be remembered with her last cat, most likely Bonaparte. She died in the National Hospital in Yedikule, and now she was buried in the Shishli Armenian Cemetery, and now she's in the intellectual section of the cemetery. The one last gesture of tribute that these women paid, respects that they paid to Hayganush Mark, was to collect her belongings, archive, and send it to Armenia. Like Ghazarosian, she also wanted to go to Armenia, but she never set foot there. But her archive, what she deemed to be important to be preserved about her, was sent to Yerevan, thanks to Silvart Gulbenkian, the one on the left who is holding her. Send it to the Yevushe Museum of Art and Literature, where we managed to study her life. Thank
you. Okay, I will now take it from where Lerna left, and sorry. Okay, now we will hear another song that was born to the friendship of Koharig and Hayganush. Partsigis, To My Pillow, was one of Hayganush Mark's poems written between 1901 and 1905 and remained unpublished until they included it in the collected works volume that Lerna talked about, Ghazarosian and her friends put together. It roughly translates as, "You will never know how much and how passionately I loved you. You will never know that in the sleepless nights, tired of dreams, you became a lamp that gave a dull light out of a wick of flickering flame. I told you what I could never even whisper to anyone else. My wet eyelashes were embraced by the warmth of your body, and you absorbed my tears and my silent sorrows. In a silent, sleepless, white night, when I squeeze you under my arms, it doesn't require any effort. Even a soft touch of mine will crush you. Oh, I know that. And drop by drop, my tears will pour out of your depths." When we were working in Hayganush Mark's archive in Yerevan, we came across the letters Koharig Ghazarosian wrote to her. The first one is written on the back of a photograph of her on the piano, as you see, and it is from 1956. Ghazarosian writes that she will soon inform Mark Hayganush Mark about the organization of the event dedicated to her honor, meaning the 50th year jubilee that Lerna just talked about. The second letter that we found is from 1962, and Ghazarosian wishes Hayganush Mark a happy new year and hopes to see her soon. In both letters, she addresses Hayganush as Im Anushik Paregamuhis, my sweet friend. And the second one ends with An Kageli Gabov, with a knot that cannot be untied, meaning their friendship. In this letter, dated 1948 and written from New York to Zaruhi Kalemkerian, one of the 12 women we feature in our upcoming book that Lerna mentioned, and Lerna also mentioned Zaruhi's name, Koharig is inviting Zaruhi Kalemkerian to her recital in New York and mentioning her wish to see Hayganush Mark, who is a common friend, when she returns to Istanbul. Today, we wanted to share with you a story that we were able to trace during our research for the project Feminism in Armenian, an Interpretive Anthology and Digital Archive. This project unearths the lives and works of 12 Armenian feminist writers from mid-19th to mid-20th centuries. Hayganush Mark is one of them, and we mentioned a couple of other names throughout the lecture. Feminism in Armenian will also have a virtual exhibition component, which is under construction right now, and will feature Koharig Ghazarosian's music, as she was friends and colleagues with many of these feminist writers and immortalized their literary outputs by setting them to music. So today we told Ghazarosian's story against the historic background we have been reconstructing for our project. Tracing Hayganush's and Koharig's friendship in photos, letters, and sheet music, and connecting the dots to reimagine their relationship in Istanbul led us to a close circle of Armenian intellectual women who experienced the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic of Turkey while in Istanbul. When we received the invitation to give a talk to commemorate the genocide, we thought it would be a great opportunity to tell this story. This is the very first time we presented on Ghazarosian and her friendship with Hayganush as a part of our larger project. The music we heard today, which flows and voices out a continuous narrative, invites us to witness the continuities and the ruptures, or in fact continuities with interruptions and tremendous losses in Armenian life in Istanbul from pre to post-genocide times. They also invite us to remember, because as renowned Turkish music scholar and critic Faruk Yener tells us about his piano teacher Koharig Ghazarosian, Ghazarosian was the mentor of many Armenian and non-Armenian, including Turkish, musicians in Istanbul, who later became the leading artists of Turkey's classical music scene. But although she was a passionate supporter of then budding, today world-renowned Turkish woman pianist İdil Biret, although she visited Biret in her home in Paris, played piano with her, dedicated a composition to her, and wrote 2 articles about her to Kulis, one after Biret's visit to Yerevan, Ghazarosian was erased from Turkish music history. The list of first women composers and pianists in Turkey do not include her. As I argued for Gomidas Vartabet, because in Turkey, culture became an arena where denial was put to practice, the generation of Armenians who were born and lived in Turkey shared the same destiny of being silenced. In the name of remembrance, we would like to end our lecture with a performance by Nora Armani, who was the first performer of the poem Daviri Vıra on the harp, written by Hayganush Mark for her dear friend Koharig Ghazarosian, and Ghazarosian set it to music. Nora Armani's performance was featured in the 1997 CD you see on this slide. Nora graciously agreed to perform Dulutyun, Laziness, another poem by Hayganush Mark, set to music by Ghazarosian, which will be the closing act of our program. Laziness translates as nothing should stir in the room, and the vases should sleep with tired roses. Piano strings should not inspire any dreams, and nothing should swing in the air. The wind should stop too, and the windscreens should fall away. The tick-tock of the clock should freeze too. Nothing should stir in the room. Milestones should vanish. Time should stop. Eyes should not look. Nothing should move. And the light sleep should slowly float on a heart. This is the musical notation scores.
Çığırdı vocinci srahin meç. Եվ ծաղկամանները միրհեն հոգնած վարդերով Տաշնամուրին լարերը չդան ոչ մեկ երազ և չորորվի ոչ մեկ իր Ովը կենա և հովպեգները ինան ուղիղ ծալքերով շամացույցին թիք թակնալ Sari. Չխլրդի ոչ մեկ իր և մրապը ձածանի թանթա սրդիմը վրա
Thank you very much, dear Nora, for this mesmerizing performance and putting together this video with Steven's piano accompaniment in the middle of the pandemic without being able to rehearse together. And my dream is that one day Nora Armani will stage Koharig's and Hayganush's story. Thank you very much for listening. Now we are ready for Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, both Dr. Bilal and Dr. Ekmekcioglu, for this just really incredible set of presentations. You may not have had an opportunity to see the Q&A, but it is full of praise and just really great enjoyment, both at the performances and at the opportunity to learn about your scholarship on these women and therefore learn about these remarkable women and that moment in post-genocide Istanbul that their lives chronicle. We have a number of questions in the Q&A, and because the program has now run to almost 1:30, I want to encourage us to perhaps extend our own plan to continue to 1:45. And as a result, Anne Karagosian has graciously agreed to share the responsibility of moderating the Q&A with me, as I will have to go to teach in about 7 minutes. But we would not want the program to end with that. So I'm going to begin the Q&A with actually a question that I will simply ask in my own voice on behalf of Anne, who had an excellent question that I share, which is that the feminist stirrings in ethnic Armenian women, such as Mark and Ghazarosian in Turkey during this period after the genocide, is itself remarkable and fascinating. And of course, some of it may indeed predate the genocide, but nonetheless persist and become such a pronounced theme. Could either of you speak to the parallels and or collaborations that may or may not have taken place with Turkish women feminists in this period, or what the contrast might even be with other women that found themselves in post-genocide Istanbul and who may have had either similar or different political organizations or cultural products at this time? What were to just continue, could you comment on any responses to these feminist positions by Armenian men in Turkey during their lives, beyond perhaps their closest friends and companions, the reception more generally in the community?
Okay, I will take that. This is a question that we are frequently asked, the one about the connections with or parallels, differences between Turkish and Armenian feminism, which is a big one, and we don't have that much time. But I'll just say this. If you look at it in the long haul of post-1860s to mid-1930s, this is the time period that that Armenian feminism was born in 1860, and for at least early Turkish Republic, it came to an end with the closing of Haygan. There are times when their interaction is possible because the political conditions allowed them to be so. So feminists are, the gist of it is that feminists are never independent of their national agendas, right? Why? Because they can't because feminism is a derivative of nationalism, right? Like they cannot come to the picture if the conditions did not gave them the subject position to partake in the national, either awakening or secularization, modernization, all that, which is well studied in so many different contexts. For the Ottoman case, the most interesting and maybe like encouraging period for us is the immediate aftermath of the 1908 Young Turk Revolution, during which we do see, for instance, a Turkish and Armenian Women's Association, and they do organizations together, for instance, fundraising for the political exiles who are coming back to the city after the end of the Hamidian regime. But it also degenerates quite quickly, like how the two communities' general paths become one of animosity and then perpetration of genocide. After the genocide, during the armistice years, no interaction whatsoever, but beginning with the Turkish westernization reforms post-1923, Kemalist goal of reaching to Western and ideal higher civilizations of the world, Turkey embarks on some projects that are considered modern. For instance, beauty pageants, right? That women showing skin. Turkey starts organizing beauty pageants, and one of them is actually becomes in the early 30s Miss Universe, Keriman Halis. And Hayganush Mark, of all people, for instance, is one of the people who serves for 3 years in the jury of the beauty pageant. And Keriman Halis, after getting the being crowned as the most beautiful woman in the world, comes back to Istanbul and visits Haygen's office, visits Hayganush Mark, and in Haygen's office, and they take a picture of them together, and it is published. So as long as they don't talk post-23, they don't talk about anything that has potentially politically dangerous, they can collaborate, really. But mostly feminists are not able to rise above these lines between perpetrator and the victim, and majority and the minority, as expected.
Great. Another question which was in the Q&A is that about where to find resource materials on these women. I mean, how can people who are interested, beyond, of course, your own work, but is there more that's available to the general public on Hayganush and Koharig and other of the cast of characters that you've presented to us today?
If they know Armenian, they can access them because their books are published, and not easily, but it is somewhat available in circulation. The other women, many of them wrote books. If they don't know, I mean, there is no secondary literature about this. If the question is about studies who looked at, there is, I mean, very few of them other than us. Victoria Rowe wrote a book actually before us, Ottoman Armenian Women's Writing, Cambridge Scholars Press. In Armenian, there is at least one study. Now I'm probably blanking on other people, but there is not a real field, which is one of the reasons why we are trying to build that field.
I'm going to end with one more question, and I know that Anne has at least two further questions to follow up with beyond this. But I was really struck by the idea of the longing to go to Yerevan and the relationship to an officially constituted Armenia that both women shared and probably was more widely shared in the community. And I just wondered about that relationship, the idea that there is what is that political construction that gets created there? Is that properly the imagined national homeland, or is it another kind of project? What is the relationship to being displaced to Yerevan as opposed to some other, place that might have been identified as a cultural homeland or capital, or really inhabited as the imagined home of the community more generally?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm taking it mainly, so just intervene. What makes Armenia Armenian is that there are Armenian institutions in there, and there's Armenian people, and almost all of them are of Armenian background, not just they don't only have Armenian citizenship. For instance, the fact that they deposit their past in Armenia is so they don't trust Turkey, first of all. I mean, they know that it's transitionary, and they've proven right many times after that. But also starting from early 60s, from Armenia, Soviet Armenia, I mean, this is about Soviet politics as well. Soviet Armenia opens up to the diaspora. 65 is the first year that's really the genocide is really commemorated. But around that time, a committee called Committee to have ties with diaspora is established in Soviet Armenia. This is a valid, important actually committee, which also has a women's section. And we know that for many of these women, Maro Markaryan was the head of it, an Eastern Armenian woman. She was writing letters. Hayganush Mark received letters, for instance, from Soviet Armenia saying that we want to have your birthday commemorated here. We don't know enough about you. Can you please write to us? There is a publication called Armenian Women Worker that we would like to feature you in there. All of these women, some of them, Zarika Nemkerian, one of them that we work on, actually had her one of the books published by this committee. I know you need to go ask goodbye. I'm getting stressed out that you will need to teach in 2 minutes.
Okay,
thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you, both of you, for this beautiful, beautiful presentation. And thank you, Anne, for continuing the Q&A.
No problem at all. Thank you. Have a good class, Asla. And
Thank
we'll
you.
continue with a couple more questions. As Asla mentioned, actually, there is one from Asla herself. So she asks if one or both of you could reflect on how your work on the lives of Hayganush and Koharig casts light on the post-genocide period in Istanbul and its fundamental cultural and intellectual impoverishment, notwithstanding the remarkable productivity of these two women. Was it, did you find that there was a significant contrast? Did you find that there were others at the same time contributing?
Okay. So the music history in Istanbul Armenian community is actually something that I looked at in my dissertation. I always thought that classical music, Western classical music, was an interesting kind of phenomenon in Istanbul that enabled a certain level of continuity. Because, for example, what happens is obviously there was a vibrant musical life, like Istanbul music, Armenian music scene was very vibrant, and diversity of like variety of musical genres, tradition, styles were performed. But with the retreat of Armenian language and Armenian song to the private sphere from public concerts and public life, most of the Armenian language concerts and Armenian language kind of gatherings were held in the either in the private or in like some kind of like cultural association of Armenians with a very censored way. Like they were censoring out. Even like an example, when I was growing up in 1980s, 90s in Turkey, we wouldn't sing any songs that had Armenia in it. We wouldn't sing any, we would sing censored versions of these songs, like changing the lyrics and stuff, a lot of adjustment because of the like repressive minority politics and like politics against the minority languages. And the community is under the surveillance of the state. Basically, like Armenian language, music, history are banned basically from instruction. So in a very interesting way that on one hand, we are kind of critical of the domination of Western classical, like there's a like uneasy relationship, complicated like picture with like this kind of exclusionary like outlook of Western classical all male kind of repertoire. It's a very interesting thing to see that piano teachers, and that's why when Lerna was talking about Haydn featuring piano teachers and piano playing, were able to like carry this continuity, and they, because they were the master musicians. They were, for example, like one example, Koharig Ghazarosian's mentor, Edgar Manas, was the person who orchestrated, who instrumentalized, wrote instrument parts of orchestration of the Turkish national anthem. So they were the master musicians coming from like late 19th century. Some of them were educated in Paris or Rome. So I mean, the Armenians were very much, they were the masters of Western classical music in Istanbul. So that generation, the first generation in the Republican Istanbul, these people are teaching in the conservatories, they're like private homes. And in Koharig's case, which is a very interesting case because she leaves and she comes back, very rare case that she comes back. And when she comes back with, and she's also a unique character because she brings all the networks of diaspora with her to Istanbul. Unlike Hayganush and others who are always in Istanbul, she comes from Paris with all the like networking that she has done. She's really like boundaryless. She from the States Armenian communities in the US, like Washington community hosted her, New York community hosted her. Two, like her concert news were covered in Iran to Armenia. So she kind of like, through classical music, she was able to not only like the Armenian diaspora, but also because, as Lerna said, it's the Soviet times, Azerbaijan, you know, she was able to, like, Idil Biret went to Armenia, Niyazi Hacıbeyov came to Istanbul, so she was almost like a cultural ambassador. The same way, she was equally like published in Echmiadzin and in Antilles. So she was bringing everybody together in a very weird way in that part of the world, or in Istanbul, or in the Armenian minority community of Istanbul. Western classical, European classical music gave some kind of a context, media, or language for people to communicate. And one interesting thing there is, for example, this Turkish music scholar, renowned, also radio programmer, Faruk Yener, says that Koharig Ghazarosian, at a time when Armenians were kind of discouraged from speaking Armenian in the public, or all the Armenian language signs that were there in the Ottoman times were like taken down. People were burning their books, and Armenian music was not audible at all in the public sphere. These Turkish musicians would go to Koharig Ghazarosian's private home to take piano lessons, and also see Khachadurian and Gomida's photographs on the wall, and really like get acquainted with Armenian life, Armenian music, and Armenian history through her. So it's a very interesting, unique case. That's why women piano playing and like that minority subjectivities is an important research topic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I think we have maybe a couple more questions, but I will send those to you both by Zoom because our time is running short. But I just want to thank both of you, Lerna and Melissa, for a very thoughtful pair of discussions, the beautiful musical offerings, and this very important awareness that you have brought to scholarly awareness, as well as the public's awareness of the important work of these two women. So thank you again and again. So once again, thanks to all of you for your attendance at this event, and we look forward to having you participate in future events, hosted by our Promise Armenian Institute and Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA Law. Thank you.